In this video, I'll be going through the different types of UV mapping. So the two main ones that we'll be using is the planar mapping and cylindrical mapping. Now we'll go through mainly planar mapping and we'll quickly go over cylindrical mapping. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to go to UV and planar. Now we don't want to click on it just yet. What we want to do is we want to click on the little white box next to it to bring up the options. So you should have on your screen the planar mapping options. Now you'll see here that it says project from X, Y, and Z. These are obviously the axes. If you don't know where to find the axes, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner here, it tells you the different axes in a 3D scene. As you see, whilst I rotate and alternate around the scene, these axes also move around to give you your bearings. Now, just to quickly go over the axes, Y is usually up and down, X being left and right, and Z's being forwards and backwards. So what you need to do is, we need to project from certain axes, depending on which face we have selected. So what we're going to do is, we're going to go to face, and I'm going to select this face here, and we're also going to select the one on the opposite side as well. Reason being is because they're both within the same axes, and it saves a lot of time just using wrapping both at the same time rather than having to do it one at a time. So once we have our faces selected, we need to know which axes they're facing, which direction are they in. So what we do is, I'll just go at a slight angle and I'll have a look at my little axes at the bottom here and determine which axes those faces are facing. And you can see here that it's actually in the Z axis, which is forwards and backwards. So you change it from project from Y or X and put it to Z. And you press apply. And you'll notice here that I have two new UV shells. The reason you know there's two UV shells is because we have kind of a different colour. One being red, one being blue. So it kind of creates a sort of purpley colour here. And you might notice that those specific squares are gone. Reason being is because when we use the planar mapping options or any sort of UV mapping options, it basically reforms those UVs into a new shape, which is what we've done here. Again, like I said in the first video, you can never get rid of these unless you delete those faces or delete those vertices or delete those edges. So there's always going to be UV shells here. And what I like to do is I like to have all these separate. We'll go on to why it's red in a second. So go back to face and select the side faces here. And again, looking at our axes, we can determine that they're in the x-axis because again, that's left and right. So we go to project from the x-axis and press apply. And we'll have two new UV shells. So I'm just going to move those out of the side. And through the process of elimination, should realize that the top and bottom faces are in the y-axis. Okay. So you may be wondering, why is one of the UV shells red whilst the others are blue? What this means is that these UVs are flipped, they're in the wrong direction. So if I turn on the checkered texture here, so this face here is this UV shell here. Have a look at the numbers and letters. We can see we have U2, V3. Now if I go behind, so look at this shell here. What can you notice about the letters and numbers? Hopefully you've noticed that they're actually in reversed. That's because this UV shell is reversed. It's not blue. If it's blue, it means it's facing the right direction. If it's red, it means it's in the opposite direction. This can cause issues. You can plainly see on screen right now is that if you have any sort of lettering or graffiti, it's going to be in the opposite direction. This could also affect your textures as well. So if you've got like a tileable brick texture, it might cause some issues with that. So we need to make sure that this is blue by flipping it. Now, in order to flip it, if you go into images, you'll see these two options here. These are the flip selected UVs, and you can flip them in the U direction or in the V direction. So basically, you can flip it horizontally or vertically. So I'm going to flip that vertically. You might need to be a little bit careful if you're using the top and bottom ones as well. So for instance, if it's like that, and if I go to this one here, it's going to be upside down. So you need to make sure that you're using the correct one. That's why I want to have the checkered texture on, so you can kind of see which direction the UVs are in. So all I'm going to quickly do is just select those UV shells and then flip them across. Okay, so now what? I've got my 6 UV shells here. What's the next step I have to do? Well, we're not completely done yet. Again, you can kind of see that they're all kind of floating around and they're quite large. And again, as I said in previous videos, you don't want to have UV shells that are overlapping. So one thing that we will need to do is to move these around and scale them down. So I'll quickly just select them all and just scale them down right now. Remember one thing, that we need to make sure that we're giving enough sort of spacing to certain parts of the object. So you can see the up and down, left and right ones, they're quite skewed right now. So let me just start moving these into place. I might just get rid of these for a second. I'll just start scaling them down like so. Next I want to get the side ones. So it's these two ones here. And again, I'll also need to start scaling these down as well, because we need to make sure that the squares also line up correctly. At the moment, they're not really that great right now. I'm kind of using the other shell as a reference to kind of make sure that the edges are right. It's going to be quite rushed, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Okay, so that works quite well. And then I need to kind of scale them in a little bit. You can see here I'm scaling them down, trying to get the right sort of shape of those squares. So I might need to go back and just kind of like compare and contrast to see if they work quite well together. So let's move that out of the way for a second. Might just get just a little bit more. I think that will be okay. Again, though, what we need to do is need to kind of place them appropriately where I want to. Then we have to go for the last two ones here. And again, same sort of thing we did for the sides. Just going to be scaling them down. Make sure they're appropriate for our object. So something like that. That might be okay. Oh, so I need to bring that in there as well. There we go. So you see right now, it's very sort of a rushed job there, but I've successfully UV unwrapped this particular cuboid and placed it within this scene here. Now one thing you may need to do as well, which I kind of like glossed over really quick, was the fact that you may need to kind of go in and line up these edges appropriately. So for instance, you can kind of see right now they're kind of misaligned, so we'll have to kind of go in and do a little bit of nitty gritty work there. Just kind of line up appropriately, or kind of make a little bit more sense. Something like that, for instance, would work a lot better. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to kind of leave it like that. So that's how to use planar mapping. Again, it is based off of the axes, so when you select a face, you have to make sure that you're looking at the Z-axes there. I don't have to do any sort of manipulation with that, so that's completely fine. So what I need to do next is, I have to go to the polygons option, go to UV snapshot, press browse, save it wherever I want it to be, make sure it's in the power of 2. I need to make sure that it's in a PNG file format. Reason being is because PNGs are transparent, so if you put it into Photoshop, the UV can be its own separate layer, and you can kind of use that as kind of like judging the distance as to where your textures are. So when you're overlapping your textures on the UVs, you can use it as sort of like guidance as to like, okay, is it completely covering that entire UV shell? Is it missing or is it misaligned? That sort of stuff. And then press OK, and it would save to wherever you saved it to. But I'm going to leave it for now. And the next type of UV mapping option is cylindrical mapping. So what we need to do is select all these side faces here. Again, cylindrical mapping basically means that it creates a UV shell all the way around your object. So go to UV, cylindrical. You don't need to press the options, because you look here, there's no real options right now. So press apply, and you'll see that it'll create a UV shell that wraps all the way around that particular object. And you can start sort of scaling it up and down like so. Sometimes you might feel like it's a bit too big, so you might need to go in, select an edge for instance, so select this edge and cut them, so you might find like you may need to kind of divide the square up a little bit. It doesn't always bring out 100% exact sort of squaring. So for instance with this if I just quickly UV wrap this one again. So for instance, this vase here, if I go to cylindrical mapping, have a look at the squares for instance. These ones are quite stretched out compared to the other ones, so I would have to kind of go in, use the UV wrapping options, also the UV options, and kind of just move them around a little bit just to kind of get the shaping much more appropriate. So it might take a little bit of time. So for instance, right now, like that. Move these around to kind of make them much more appropriate. Kind of slowly move them around just to kind of make them a lot better. But again, this is kind of like a rush job right now, but that's the kind of things that you would have to do there. Okay, so those are the basic ways of UV unwrapping using the planar and the cylindrical mapping options. There is a automatic option as well, and you can see that it's done a pretty good job, but more complex stuff doesn't really work that well. I can kind of give an example with this one here. I don't know if this will do it quite well. So automatic, it's done a kind of a decent job, but don't rely on it too much. I highly advise against it. Manual UV wrapping is probably the best way to do it, mainly because you have a much more better degree of control over things. So it is something that is worth mentioning. You have camera-based ones as well, but you don't really want to kind of do that because again, it's kind of based off your perspective camera. See if that, so that's probably not the best way of doing it. But I would say give UV wrapping a try. The whole idea of UV wrapping is that you need to kind of practice with it. It does take a bit of time to get used to. With more complex stuff, again, there's gonna be a lot of sort of manipulation with the UV points. But the whole thing is like it's practice, practice, practice. You need to kind of get used to it and play around with it. I will have an example of UV wrapping uploaded as well, so you can kind of see me quickly going through the process, just like I've done now, and just kind of talking through how I'm doing it and why I'm doing it in a certain way.